This is Paul Johnson with The Optimistic American. You know, we exist to try to help rekindle the American spirit. It's important in doing that we learn to listen to people that maybe we don't agree with everything that they have to say. There are gifts that can be given from people on the left, the right, and the center. I'm an independent today, but my guest today is an individual who has been a Republican for a large part of his life. He actually worked inside the Reagan administration. He is illustrious. He has an amazing career. He's written 30-plus books. He also has lectured in over 73 different countries and actually is one of the most popular motivational speakers literally anywhere in the world. He's someone that I think is worth listening to. I gained a lot of insights from him today. I enjoyed our talk, and I think you will too. Again, this is all in the spirit of trying to figure out how it is in this complex society we can work with one another. We can listen to ideas that maybe aren't identical to our own, and how it is that we can find optimism. Join me today with motivational speaker Dan Clark. I think you'll enjoy it. Dan, thank you very much for being on our show today.
Thanks, Paul. My pleasure.
All right. So you've given speeches in 75 different countries.
Yes, sir.
And you've written 21 different books.
37.
Well, okay. So my Tom, who helped us
let's
put this
just rip
together.
his lips off right now, but it doesn't matter. But you notice I didn't say 37 good books, so let's just cut right to the chase.
You really are one of the world's greatest motivational speakers. You've spoken all around the world. And what I'd like to do today is I'd like to talk about some of those messages that I think that you've given out. But before we do, I want to start with your books because I read some time back Chicken Soup for the College Soul. It's one of the funniest books that I ever read. Now, you just told me that you've written a lot more than I actually originally thought. What was your favorite?
You know, my flagship book is called The Art of Significance, Achieving the Level Beyond Success. So it was published by Penguin Random House. And after I finished my book tour, 6 months long, I realized the most frequently asked question was, what's the difference between success and significance? And I reflected on a conversation I had with one of my football teammates. He was drafted in the NFL in the second round by the Philadelphia Eagles. And after 2 years with the Eagles, he's traded to my Oakland Raiders. And after 4 years in the league playing at the highest Pro Bowl status, one day he walks out of practice, quits, never to play again. Why? He loved being a football player, but he hated playing football. So successful people get what they think they want, focused on what matters at the moment. But those of us who are striving to live lives of significance, we actually focus on what matters most, which is what lasts the longest, so we don't die with regrets and with our intentions and music still in us. And so I evaluated life and came up with the 12 highest universal laws of life-changing leadership. And when I sat down with Adrian Zackheim, the world's most famous, successful, and amazing editor, publisher at Penguin, he said, how do you know there's not 9 highest universal laws? How do you know there's not 21? And I told him that this book was a 30-year project and that law number 1 is the highest law of the universe, obedience, because every other law of the universe, resonance, relativity, mathematics, attraction, law of the harvest, law of anything that you can name, law of gravity, they're all governed by obedience. We don't even have to believe or understand law of gravity, but it still has an impact on our lives, which I think is why I'm a student and a fascinated fan of what you do and the way you think and your podcast and your messaging and your book.
Well, thank you.
Because it boils down to what is real, that every culture, that every race and gender, that every socioeconomic individual or circumstance can boil down to. Surely, as human beings, as brothers and sisters in the family of humanity, surely there are some core values and absolute truths that we need to be able to agree on.
All right, I have a question for you. So you made me think about my view on this. So we're called the optimistic American because
Absolutely.
I think it's undeniable. If you look at the facts, statistics, the numbers, there's no society ever in the history of mankind where there has been a better place to be than right here and right now. Yet, if you asked me, I would tell you that I am concerned. And the concern is that while we have a huge amount of abundance, I feel sometimes like we're losing our purpose. We're losing our sense of meaning. You say obedience. I want to understand that. I want to understand what that means.
Well, from an athlete's perspective, it's better to be disciplined than motivated because we can't always be motivated. And if we subject ourselves, it's a lesson in humility, subjecting ourselves to a higher authority and checking our sources of truth. But once we know that there is an absolute truth and we are willing to subscribe to that, and we know what our core values are, 99% of our decisions are already made for us. It simplifies our life when we understand the significance of obedience. And if you believe in a higher power, if you believe in a supreme being as I do, what I understand is that our world, and especially our universe, was organized by a specific set of laws. And so it behooves us as human beings to learn, to study, to figure out what those set of laws are. Because when we obey that specific law, we reap a specific reward. But when we disobey that specific law, we also suffer a specific consequence. And because there is a master organizer, a supreme being, who created the universe and organized it and set forth the number one highest universal law as obedience, to test our obedience, he gave us what we call free will agency, so that we always have a choice to go left or right, to do this or do that. And to guarantee that we would always have our free will agency, our master organizer, our supreme being, gave us an opposition in all things. You got to have darkness to appreciate the light. You have to have sickness to appreciate health. You have to have justice to appreciate mercy. You have to have death to appreciate the sanctity of life. And because each of us would misuse our free will agency because of the opposition in all things, I believe our God also instilled in every human being, in every race, in every country, every gender, an inherent ability to discern truth from error, right from wrong. And we commonly call that ability our conscience. And if what I'm saying is true, which I believe it to be, that means, Paul, that our conscience will never fail us. Only our desire to follow it decreases as we continue to do the wrong thing. So the classic example is we're in this beautiful podcast studio, your amazing superstar engineer, Slater. And let's just say there was a group of other folks that gathered here, and we left today and went into a different room in this building, and that room stunk so bad. We were so repulsed, our eyes watered, our noses started to bleed. We went into automatic gag reflex. Do you realize if we stayed in that room for 5 minutes, maybe 10 max, suddenly that room would no longer smell? We had become desensitized, and it now has become the new normal. And if that's not what's happening in our country, if that's not what happened during COVID, everybody was saying, you got to pivot, you got to pivot. And in my mind, if you pivot, you go around in a circle and end up in the exact same spot you were from where you began. That's the stupidest idea and bad word. But people were trying to rush back to normal, and my question was to hold on, time out. What part of normal is worth rushing back to? Because we've become desensitized. I love the podcast with Dr. Basham because you were talking about we are, as human beings, we are hardwired to be programmed. Just that one statement alone, Mr. Johnson, changed my perspective, changed my life. And that's the significance of this podcast. That's the significance of us writing our books, to generate a larger impact, to spread the news and challenge people to actually be honest with themselves and seek truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Everybody says you got to think outside the lines, you got to think outside the box, but what if the answers are still in the box? Plato taught all knowledge is recollection. So you as a mayor, me as a professional speaker, anytime we stand up in front of a room and we say something profound or evocative and people nod their heads in agreement, we're not teaching them anything new. They're recalling something that they already learned in a previous experience. So if we're serious about seeking truth, the most noble thing we can do, the most important thing to do is to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah,
it's like my buddy in college. He read that drinking alcohol is bad for you, so he stopped reading. If that's not Washington, D.C. right now in our political mess, I don't know what is.
Yeah. So, there's a lot in there to unpack. Again, back to optimism. The Stoics believed that to be optimistic, you had to kind of start with a belief that there was an order. There was an order to society,
absolutely.
right? And if you believe that there was an order to society, you kind of believe things were going to work out.
Michelangelo's Vitruvian Man.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Look at the symmetry.
And if on the other hand, you believe there is no order and that the universe is chaos, then you will believe that everything will just simply return to chaos. And that's a pessimistic point of view. So having an optimistic point of view comes from a belief that there's a designed order, and it was designed long before we maybe even were even envisioned.
I agree.
Now, the second thing that I find interesting about that comment is you hit it fast, but it's this idea of truth. We started our country in 1776 with the idea that we hold truth, that there are a certain set of truths that not only we believe in, but they also were the glue that held us together. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and were endowed upon by our Creator with certain inalienable rights.
Which means obedience does not come from man, it comes from a higher power that I prefer to call God.
And what the challenge is that we're in an era where I see the extremes of both sides challenging whether or not truth exists, whether or not those truths exist. You don't have to listen long to know that challenge is happening on the right. You can turn on any channel you want, but it's oftentimes missed on the left. Kind of this whole postmodernist idea that has begun to form is one that says, hey, there are no truths. They don't exist. It's only about power. It's about who has power and who wants power. And so consequently, there's only an oppressed and an oppressor.
You got it. Absolutely. That brings up something really interesting. It's kind of it's not a stretch of a segue, but, I want to ask every listener, where were you on September 11th? And the new generation they don't even remember what happened. Mm-hmm. It was my son's 16th birthday. And I said yes to a speech in Allentown, Pennsylvania, sponsored by the healthcare community for the entire community. And I said yes because I could be back to Salt Lake City, Utah, where I live half the year, and I live here in Gilbert, Arizona half the year. But I could be back in time by 2 o'clock in the afternoon in time for my son to come home from school and have his amazing 16th birthday party. And the jets were hijacked, the 19 hijackers, and we know exactly what happened. But here's what we need to do is pause and ask ourselves, what was the lesson learned when we talk about the optimistic American? On September 11th, those 19 terrorists, those guys who hijacked, the 4 planes, the 2 into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and Flight 93, United Flight 93, went down to Somerset, Pennsylvania. They didn't attack our country, Paul. They didn't try to overthrow our government. They didn't try to capture landmass. They attacked what we believe in, mm-hmm. Which means living in America does not make you an American. What makes you an American is subscribing to these ideals. So we've come full circle mm-hmm. to what you're talking about. America was founded, divinely inspired. Look at the history. Look at the minutes. Look at the agenda. When they came to an impasse, they called time out and they solicited help, divine intervention. They solicited help from an almighty God. Mm-hmm. So the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, they were all inspired by a higher power. Mm-hmm. So when individuals want to argue that there are no truths, there's no such thing as truth, what they're trying to do is they're trying to give that God-given inalienable right from heaven to man to decide who gets it, who deserves it, and who doesn't. And that's absolutely anti-American. It's anti-Christ, it's anti-family, it's anti-everything you can imagine.
Yeah, those ideals that you talked about, I always loved Plato's The Allegory of the Cave.
I love it.
This concept that, what he was really trying to do in many respects was he was trying to teach them that oftentimes they weren't following their real ideals. So he was talking about the trial of Socrates.
Oh, yeah.
And in that trial, of course, Socrates upset them. Half the people had voted saying, okay, you weren't following what you should have been following.
He was corrupting the children.
Right, and they were upset by that. But of course, when he gave this speech that said, yeah, let me tell you what you should do to punish me. What you should do to punish me is
pension.
Give me a pension, right? And of course, that inflamed them.
That sounds like Biden.
Then all of them ended up deciding that they were going to have him killed.
Yeah.
Well, what Plato was trying to say is, that's not living up to an ideal. An ideal, we have an ideal of everything. We have an ideal of the perfect person, of a triangle. I love the idea that he used the triangle. He said, okay, here are all the elements of a triangle. But he said the triangle is more perfect in your head than it is written on a wall. And what he was really trying to say is, well, courage and honesty and truth, those are as real as that triangle, right? That there's these concepts that you have in your head that end up helping us frame what is real, what is the ideal. And he said, that wasn't justice. That wasn't justice what you did. You did something out of anger. Well, the allegory of the cave, obviously, is that as men start to walk closer to the light, they end up seeing these images on the wall. And it becomes really hard to explain those images to people who are further down inside the hole. But the closer they get to the logos, the closer they are to actually having an understanding of truth. And it seems to me that's our mission. Our mission is constantly to be driving towards that truth.
And with your, bringing up the allegory of the cave, too many people are afraid of the shadow instead of the reality, because the shadow casts an image much bigger than what is real, which is real. So if we live our lives in constant fear of the shadow, oh my gosh, what if? And I would challenge everybody to make a list of everything that you worried about in your life as far back as you can remember, 5 years, 10 years, and figure out how many of those worries actually turned into reality. And I would suspect that most of them did not. At some point, we've got to focus in on what's truth. So let me just use an analogy. Obviously, I'm a man of faith Christian, but that doesn't offend anyone from Islam or Judaism if you just understand the stories that Jesus taught in the Bible, the parables. Eliminate the religious connotation, eliminate the religious tradition that is accompanying the Bible. And if you look at the statement, money is evil, that's kind of a left woke deal. Money is evil. And we always have to make excuses through the free enterprise system that we made a lot of money, but we paid a lot of taxes, and then we've done a lot of good through philanthropy. They always forget about that. Well, it's not money that's evil. It's the love of money that's evil. And in the parable of the Good Samaritan in the Bible, we have to understand this. The exact same money and coinage that the Good Samaritan used to help that stranger and to pay his bill at the end and to take better care of the community, the exact same money and coinage that the Good Samaritan used is the same money and coinage that Judas Iscariot used to betray Jesus Christ. So when we start understanding truth, I'll go with the Christian analogy. If you want to know about Jesus stumbling towards the cross, you don't ask Judas Iscariot. You don't go to some antichrist. You go to Peter, James, and John. You go to Mary, his mother, to find out who he really was. What were his true character traits and attributes? And because we're talking about the true nature of who we are, who are you really, not who are we pretending to be? One of the great stories I've told for so many years, Paul, is I'm walking in the mall with one of my buddies. Someone bumps into him and he spills his cup of coffee. I said, what happened? He said, I spilled my cup of coffee. I said, no, you didn't. He said, what? I said, you didn't spill your cup of coffee. You spilled what was in your cup. Had you had tea in your cup, you would have spilled tea. Had you
Your
had
kids
water,
must have had a hard time in life.
yeah. I said if you had had tea, water or orange juice in your cup, you would have spilled water or orange juice. We can only spill what's in our cup. So if you're negative, if you've been overrun by pessimistic, a law of scarcity, untruths, fake news, and you've bought into that, if you're negative when the economy bumps into you, when a personal relationship goes south, when someone screws you over at a business deal, if you're negative, what spills out is anger and intolerance and vindictiveness. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to get you, and woe me, oh, it's not fair, you don't understand. But if you're positive and the economy bumps into you and something goes south in your relationships or in your business deals, what spills out is forgiveness and unconditional love, non-judgmental friendship, because we can subscribe to that higher truth, that higher set of core values that govern our lives. So in my book, The Art of Significance, Achieving the Level Beyond Success, law number one, the highest law of the universe, is the law of obedience. But it's no surprise to you that the 12th law, the bookend, is forgiveness. Because if you subscribe to the negative, pessimistic view of the world, you harbor grudges and you harbor anger. And if you stay angry, it's like you drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So forgiveness is one of the 12 highest universal laws, helps us go full circle back to our conversation about what are we supposed to do? What is the ideal human being? Who can we become?
Better version of ourselves.
You got it, the better version of ourselves. And therefore, now we remove the religious connotation and just see what Jesus taught. Just see what Gandhi taught. Just see what Muhammad taught.
Have you ever read the Jefferson Bible?
I have not. I'm
So,
going to do.
do you know the story behind it?
No.
So Thomas Jefferson ended up in a argument or a debate with the religious left, because at the time the religious community was considered the left as opposed to the right, and he sat down on the floor of the White House and he cut out every single word that Jesus said, and he pasted it back into a Bible. It ends up being, I don't remember, 17 pages or something like that, and he gives it to the religious left, and he said, there's what I believe. Now, of course, it has the story in it of wealth, right? The story, remember the story of the servants, where he takes the servants and says, hey, go out and I'm going to give each of you money, and when I come back, we'll see what you did. And the one buried it, right? And the other two did some type of investment. And he said, okay, this one that buried it, he's going to work for you guys forever. Right? He was saying that being a steward of money is a good thing. It's an important thing. Because all money really is it's a storage of labor and our investment. And it gives us the ability to not only live, but to do good things. So it can be evil. It can be used for evil. But in any event, what Jefferson was trying to say is, here's the ideal that I'm trying to live up to. And it's a beautiful book and a beautiful story. If you get a chance, they hand it out on the floor of Congress to people when, well, at least they used to. I don't know if we do anymore, but
I love it.
to people who came in.
That brings up something very interesting. I love to talk about something that Dr. Jim Rohn, he was one of my mentors. Zig Ziglar was my sponsor in the National Speakers Association back in the day. That's why I was the guy in the Reagan White House who took Mrs. Reagan's Just Say No program to all 50 states. That's how I kind of got into the big-time speaking world. But Dr. Jim Rohn, he said, he taught me a couple of things I want to bring up. The significance of your podcast, Paul, the significance of your mission, your purpose in life. As an outsider, as a fan of yours, it seems to be to advocate that formal education will make you a living, but self-education will make you a fortune. Dr. Jim Rohn. Mm-hmm. But what he also said, three things come to mind. What he also said is that we become the average of the 5 people we associate with the most, even online. So if you hang around with 5 broke people, you're going to become the 6th. If you hang around with 5 negative, whining, blaming, complaining people, you're going to become the 6th. You put a hard-to-catch horse in the same field with an easy-to-catch horse, most of the time you end up with 2 hard-to-catch horses. And what we learned in COVID, when you put a healthy child in the same room with a sick child, most of the time you end up with 2 sick children, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. So moral of the story, to be disciplined, healthy, and significant, we must be willing to pay any price and travel any distance to associate with extraordinary human beings, even online.
My dad would say back, he passed away a couple of weeks ago, but he was a great man. He was always enjoyable to listen to and fun, and and just a good person. But he would always say with our friends when he would see somebody who was worried about it, he says, look, I know you think you're going to reform the devil. He says, but that ain't what happens. He reforms you. Right?
Oh, I love it. I love it. So the third thing that Dr. Jim Rohn teaches us is that we are paid for the value we bring to the marketplace. And it takes time to make ourselves valued in the marketplace, but we're not paid for time. If that was true, you and I could sit here and people would just send us money. Mm-hmm. Outside of these walls, people are bragging, I make $20 an hour. That's not true. If you're not making $20 an hour, you're paid for the value you bring to that time spent. And most people hate their jobs. They only look forward to Friday instead of Monday. They think they're paid by the hour, when in reality, we're paid for the value we bring to that hour. And in our conversation here with America, the reason why people aren't rushing across the border into Mexico, the reason why people aren't hopping on boats and trying to get into Vietnam or back to Cuba, the reason why this is still the greatest country on the planet is because we have an inherent economic incentive-motivated income ladder that, let's say, starts at $5 an hour. Right now, as we sit here in your podcast studio, there are people working for McDonald's who are paid $5 an hour because that's their value in the marketplace. And at the top of that value income opportunity ladder is, let's say, $80 million in annual salary, which is what the CEO of Coca-Cola made last year. And so if you want to increase your value to the marketplace, we don't need to have legislation to mandate that the minimum wage is $15 an hour, because that $15 an hour is already on the income opportunity economic ladder in America. So if you want to go from $5 an hour to $15 an hour, you don't beg, borrow, and steal. You don't need legislation. What you do is you figure out through education, through experience, through work ethic, through sacrifice, all the qualities that our grandpa and grandmas used to build their business and to develop America into the greatest economic engine in the world. It's already on that economic ladder. All we have to do is figure out a way to make ourselves more valuable and go from $5 an hour to $15 an hour, not having government give it to us, but working our way up through experience. So once we understand that economic ladder, my challenge to anyone within the sound of my voice is, what are you willing to do to increase your value in the marketplace? Mm-hmm. And it's not dropping out of high school. It's not having children out of wedlock so you can make more money in the welfare system. It's not taking to the streets or going to a college campus and waving a foreign flag on my land when you're not an American, and that doesn't give you the right to do anything in my country that just goes against our laws, that goes against our ideals, the pure truth that America was founded on. At some point, somebody needs to step up and stand up for what is America.
Well, I think the thing that you're saying, I mean, this is clear to me. If you look at the four quartiles, and there are people who live in the bottom quartile, people who live in the top quartile. If you're willing to do a handful of things, you can move from the bottom quartile to the second to the top. One of them is get the best education you can.
Got it.
Now, that doesn't mean you have to go to college and law school. That may mean that you decide, hey, I'm going to go to trucking school and I'm going to learn how to work on trucking motors, right? There are lots of different jobs that are out there where you can still get an education to become better at that area. The second thing is work hard. Right? This doesn't happen easily. You have to work hard in the system to do that. Number three, marry somebody with the same values.
You got it.
You know, if you marry somebody with that same set of values that is interested in making certain that they're progressing their life through education and through hard work, your household is going to do a lot better.
I know you'll remember number 4. Let me just interject right there. Everybody is crying systemic racism. And if you really back off, and yes, that could be happening, and yes, it probably has, but being born white is not a sin. Don't make it a sin. Don't make it difficult for us to wave our flag that I'm a true patriot American based on these core values on which I was raised in a 2-parent family. Oh, you had a privilege. No, my parents married somebody with their same values, and that's why they stuck together all those years. Mm-hmm. One of the things we have to believe, though, is that education is the key. And I don't know one restaurant, I don't know one movie theater, I don't know one school in America where, regardless of your gender or your race, you cannot enter and pursue that education. There's nothing that's standing in your way because we are in America, the United States of America, a land of opportunity, not entitlement. Mm-hmm. Those people who are out, protesting on the streets, we ought to have some sort of criterion where first we give them an IQ test. Second, we check their level of education. Third, we check their level of character and moral compass and sense of right and wrong. Do they really understand the Constitution of the United States? Do they really understand the Declaration of Independence and that our laws, and especially the number one law in the world, the law of the universe, is obedience?
I'm an independent today. I used to be a Democratic mayor.
I love you. I love it, baby.
I'm a firm believer in civil rights, equal rights, and human rights. Everybody ought to have a similar opportunity. But that's also based upon the idea that you have to bring something to the table, too. You have to be willing to do the hard work that gets you there. What I found is that the parts of the Constitution that we forget, the Constitution that was focused on the individual, are those other parts, like property rights. Right? Why property rights? Well, if you go out and work for something, you ought to have the right to own it. If you create it and invent it, that's yours as an individual. Government shouldn't have the right to take that from you. That's the 5th and the 14th Amendment.
Absolutely.
It's the process of all of those things working together that gives opportunity. Now, where I become concerned is that there is a movement on the left trying to say, no, our country wasn't founded in 1776. It was founded in 1619. And the answer to that is that's the least liberal thing you could do. All right, what you're doing is you're saying that the foundation of our country that was based upon these rights being granted to all of us by our maker is not what our country is based upon at all. Well, if that's true, then why was slavery immoral? I mean, slavery has existed for 5,000 years. It goes all the way back to the Egyptians. It was immoral because we said the individual is the center, and that was done in 1776. Absolutely. I don't have any understanding of why the left would want to abandon that. That should be one of the most important things that they say, no, that's ours. Exactly. By the way, Frederick Douglass, who was in the Civil War, that was his speech. He gave a speech to the South saying, oh, no. This country was founded on giving me an equal opportunity because the Declaration of Independence, it's a mistake to believe that we were created ideal. We were looking to not be a perfect union, a more perfect union than the one we were leaving. All right, and that set us upon this course. And those ideas, it was inevitable that slavery would be immoral when you put the individual at the center. By the way, that's a religious value. It's a Christian Judeo value.
Absolutely.
If there's a reason why the world is divided between collectivists and individualists. The collectivists didn't have people that, like Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther, who said, hey, God sees every person as having dignity. Each of us have a direct connection. Well, those ideas were the same ideas that our founders said, well, if God owes you dignity, so does our government.
You got it.
And it began to evolve into this ethos that says, here's how we develop more ideally. That's being pretty aggressively attacked by the extreme left.
I know. And back to our conversation about systemic racism, maybe, yes, maybe, but it's systemic breakdown of the family.
Well, systemic is meant to say, and I want to hear this part about the family, but it's meant to say that it's capitalism. That's really what it's meant to do. And the answer is no, capitalism is not systemically racist. You could use it if you were a racist in a wrong way, but it's not.
I agree.
I also believe, look, I served as mayor, and I saw problems that would happen on the police department. There were things that we did that were wrong. But the minute you applied the word racist to it, you actually made it more difficult to deal with the real underlying problem.
That's why
because you just started dividing up sides.
You bet it.
During our era, the Serpico thing was a big issue. And when Serpico was a big issue, what happened was we started separating the departments saying, okay, we want to make certain that when people go out and start working in a neighborhood, that we only give them 6 months or so to do that because they become corrupt. They start shaking people down. They take money from them. Well, what was the challenge to that? Police officers don't know anybody who lives in the neighborhood. All of a sudden, there's a loss of connection. We found if you started making that connection again, that a lot of those problems went away. The point that I'm trying to make here is that you're never going to get police officers to buy into the fact that they're racist. In fact, you will find oftentimes it's Black police officers who become the most upset by that, who will say, no, that's just not the case. But we end up being in this position where we're talking about systematic as opposed to saying, hey, why don't we just judge each one based upon its merits?
You got it.
So I'm sorry, I didn't want to take
No,
you
I
from
was
the
just
family.
going to say, look at the statistics. Statistics don't lie. When there's a father, a male in the family as a role model for those young men and young women, how does that affect their desire to stay in school? If you have educated parents, they can help their children with homework. And there's no need for that after-school program if you have sports and dance and the arts and made it available. You know, the one thing that I agree with when people say systemic racism, what we have to do to fix that is give them accessibility. So we know the difference between, you know, equal rights and equal opportunity. If you have
can't guarantee outcome.
Nope, but if you have a 2-story building and all the restrooms are upstairs and someone's in a wheelchair and they don't have access, they have the equal right to go to the bathroom, but they don't have equal access to get up there unless you put a ramp or put an elevator. That's what we have to understand, and I love what you just said, Paul. Individually evaluate each situation. You know, because of what I do for a living, I was given an opportunity to go into a simulated 360-degree virtual reality. You know, it was so close to live, to put myself in a situation where the SWAT teams and police officers and first responders are put through this course. And the first scenario was a school shooting. The second scenario was a shooter in a theater like in Denver. And the third one was you go into a domestic violence situation, blah, blah, blah. And I was equipped. I was an officer with the gun. Everything was virtual. The gun was real, just simulated, you know, with the blanks and the actual kick. It was so true. It was so real. And the entire time, and we were there for way over an hour, maybe 90 minutes, went through all these different scenarios. And the evaluation afterwards was, when somebody's shooting at you, did you notice their race or their gender? And all of us said, absolutely not. They were the bad guy. So when you start saying that police officers are racist, when you confront someone who's breaking the law, in my experience, I guarantee that they don't look at that person's color or gender. They're like, they're breaking the law, and I've sworn to uphold the law, and you better obey. And when these guys are shooting at us, I mean, it was so real, Paul. You know, we had to take cover, and I'm shooting back, and I was a pretty good shot and got all the bad guys. But the reality of being put in that situation illuminated to me that when you are under attack, there is no racism, there is no gender, there's no sexism. It is basically good versus evil. And what are we going to do about it?
You know, Dan, I'll give a little caveat to that because to me it's important. I definitely saw police officers who did bad things.
Yes.
And I definitely saw police officers who every now and then did some racist things. But it was rare. But to say it didn't exist, that just would not be accurate.
Yes, sir.
What I would say is that when you watch this information come out on the news, if I learned any lesson in being there, you watch it and you have this instinct to jump to a conclusion. Well, here's what happened. If you give it time, a whole different set of facts start to come out. And what you find when you give it time is you find something closer to the truth. And this is what I found. Almost 80 to 90% of the time, I started by thinking the police officer was wrong by what I was watching on the news. And then by the end, I was going, well, actually, that doesn't make sense. I'll give you an example. We had an individual who ended up being shot. I may exaggerate the number, but not by much, like 246 times by police officers. So the instinct was, well, it was racist, and this guy was shot too many times, and the department didn't give him, they weren't right to him. Well, as the facts came out, he'd taken hostage. Police department surrounds the house. when they try to get him to come outside, he walks outside. He has a gun in the air. They yell him to put down the gun. He drops the gun and fires at them. Well, guess what? Every police officer sitting there shoots back, right? And so he falls down, crawls over to his gun, gets his gun, stands back up, shoots at him again. They all fire at him again, right? If we were to be upset by the time we were done with anything, it was the amount of misses that happened, right? Because right? But the point is, it wasn't as it seemed at the first moment. It just wasn't as it seemed. And in that case, in particular, everything that you just said is accurate. They're trying to figure out how to stop the bad guy from hurting those people in that house.
Yeah.
That's what they're trying to do.
Think about in current news, I know this podcast is evergreen, but with Hamas attacking Israel.
Yeah, I'd love to have your opinion on that.
Well, when the protests erupted, especially one of the squad who came out on the steps and incited protest to the tune of almost inciting a riot. She's crying, what about those, Palestinian babies? Well, rush to judgment, Hamas, the propaganda machine that they are, they released the story that rocket had come, that destroyed the hospital had come from Israel. Mm-hmm. And as the facts started to uncover and reveal themselves, which wasn't a whole long time afterwards, it was just like an hour or so. Even Biden, lying Joe, sleepy Biden, he even comes on TV and says, no, we know now as they've traced it and we know how to triangulate and see where the missile came from. It was shot from Gaza and took out that hospital that created all these huge protests that are still going on. That's the most ridiculous thing in the world. In fact, can I give you a couple of examples of the misinformation machines that we have to deal with, and how we as citizens can really seek out the sources of truth? Okay, so I know you've been to Bosnia, and I know you've been all around the world, and the genocide that happened there, and we're all aware of that. But you were an eyewitness. You saw what happened, and it was a good cause for us to go in there and just take them out. But I was doing United Nations leadership training, and my first trip to the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, was in 1991.
Yeah, you played all over the Soviet Union in those speeches.
So what happened was 1989, to put it in a historical backdrop, that's when the Berlin Wall came down. So, Gorbachev take down this, it was just dramatic, and Let Freedom Ring was all across the world. And the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. So I'm over there for 15 days to speak and produce these concerts, these shows, these speeches, if you will, an evening of music, comedy, and motivational theater. And huge audiences. And in that 15-day period of time, I was broadcast live. My speech to 3,000 folks was broadcast live on Moscow 1 to all 15 Commonwealth of Independent States. And I was issued a government translator. It's kind of amusing. And because
what month this was?
I'm sorry?
I'm just wondering, I was in Poland in 1991. What year was this?
This was in January, because I went every 6 months after that.
All right. I'm sorry.
No, it's beautiful. Yeah. Let's put it into context. And so I gave this 90-minute speech. I would speak, and then I would stop, and the translator would translate and speak and stop, the little song and dance happening on stage. And when we were finished, because it was broadcast live, and I was with the United Nations, so I had my own translator, they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go back to Moscow 1, to the television headquarters, downtown Moscow, and I want to watch the video replay. And then tongue-in-cheek, because I'm a little twisted, he said, why do you want to do that? I said, I want to make sure that the translator gave the same speech I did. And here's what happened, Paul. We pull in to the parking lot, and there are 4 tanks parked back to back to back to back in each of the 4 directions. There are 3 levels of high-level security, rolled barbed wire, looked like a prison, AK-47 carrying soldiers creeping around in the shadows of the night. Turns out Moscow 1, the government-owned and operated television station, was the most highly guarded and fortified building in all of Moscow.
Wow.
I'd spoken at the Kremlin. I'd spoken at the White House. I'd been all around. And yet the most highly guarded and fortified building in all of Moscow was a television station. Why? He or she who controls the hearts and minds of the people controls the people. So I challenge anyone listening here, and I honor you as an independent, because when you turn on CNN and then you turn on Fox and you try to decipher the same story is being, the numbers are out of whack. The same story is being reported from a completely different set of lenses, as you would use in some of your interviews. And I realized, we've gone full circle now. What do you believe? And have you really evaluated what the politics, what the socioeconomic, what the sexual orientation, what the upbringing, were you raised with a silver spoon in your mouth? CNN, Vanderbilt. The Vanderbilts. How were you raised? How was Sean Hannity raised? How was Anderson Cooper raised? Let's just look at the background of these individuals. Where's their mindset? What truth do they believe? What set of core values do they have that govern their behavior? And then go to the producer, dive a little deeper. What is his or her political view? Because guaranteed, they control the narrative. And the second example is, I've been downrange 8 times, Iraq, Afghanistan, all over the world, firing up our combat troops, going into harm's way. And my first trip to the AOR, as they say, area of responsibility downrange, was in 2005. From February 14th, count 16 days, I was there, spoke 23 times on 12 bases and out on the USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier to over 30,000 of our bravest men and women. So I'm in Florida before I leave. And the first ever free election in Iraq was held, I believe, on January 31st. Just look it up. But right then, because I was in Florida, and I remember turning on the television news, and they reported 11 explosions at the polling stations in Iraq. Now, I live in Utah, so, my understanding, Iraq is about 2.5 times the state of Utah. But Utah's about the same size as Arizona and New Mexico and Colorado and Wyoming and Kansas. So you can kind of get a picture for how big Iraq is. And so I'm like, wow, this is sad. My family's nervous. You're going over there and there's all these bombs. And it's 2005. The second Battle of Fallujah had happened in February. So, we're losing soldiers, Marines, airmen, and sailors. It's the war is raging. And I go over there to fire up our troops. So I'm a guest of the 3-star general. So when I arrive, I go down in a matter of days. I'm at Camp Victory, which is one of Saddam's palaces in Baghdad. And I go in and I meet the United Nations, the NATO, and the coalition and American commanders. And I meet the 2 gentlemen and 1 woman who conducted the first free election across Iraq. I saw the plat map. I saw every single one of these polling stations and their locations. And it turns out there was 5,628 polling stations in Iraq and only 11 explosions. And what did the media report? The 11 explosions. I'm like, you got to be freaking kidding me. So I do my management, and then I come back, and the word gets out that this motivational speaker, this chicken soup for the soul guy, just went over and fired up our troops. But I had untethered access to anyone. I interviewed everyone. It was amazing. I have it all on tape. It was so cool. And I get back, and so I'm doing a lot of these national talk shows. And I'm on one I won't name by name, but it was the point counterpoint, show of the decade. And think about the time frame of 2005. And so all of a sudden I'm there, and they, kind of complimented me on me serving my country and going over and firing up our troops. And then it came. The liberal side of the issue, and I bring that up on purpose because what we're seeing in the fake news world is the pessimists versus the optimists. And I say, if you're a left-wing Democrat, you're a communist. And if you're a right-wing Republican, you're a fascist. Let's just come to grips and understand who we're supposed to really be. You know what I'm saying? The independent, the middle of the road, brother. So I come back, and this guy just fires out the first question. So, Dan, now that you're an eyewitness that our Iraqi policy has never worked, could you tell us why the Iraqis hate us being there? And I'm like, what? And I said, ask me a different question. He goes, well, because we couldn't formulate any kind of a coalition and that we really shouldn't be there, tell us what we need to do to just, get our troops home safely as quickly as possible. And I said, stop. I said, I know exactly what you're doing. I said, you're controlling the narrative and you're asking me a negative question to get a negative answer, so I don't trust you. And he goes, what do you mean you don't trust me? I said, we need to trust the media. And we do. You're a checks and balance system on purpose. I honor the media. I love the media.
Honor the check and balance.
And I honor the check and balance. But do you realize what you're doing? You're asking me a negative question that solicits a true answer, but it's a negative answer. And if you ask me a positive question that solicited a positive true answer, we could still get truth, but it's positive or negative. And he goes, what do you mean? And I said, is Michael Jackson one of the greatest songwriters and entertainers of all time? Yeah. Is Michael Jackson one of the weirdest ducks born on any planet? Yeah. Both are true answers. Mm-hmm. One's positive and one's negative. So now dovetail that conversation, that experience into what happened at Moscow downtown Moscow.
We're going to get back to that.
So Moscow 1, he or she who controls the hearts and minds of the people controls the people.
Yeah, George Orwell said, he who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future.
Beautiful. So now on the national talk show, he or she who asks the questions controls the conversation. And if you don't get both sides of the issue or seek the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, then we're just spreading fake news. So let me just share something. So
I got to know what happened with this interpreter. Did they interpret it correct or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think so.
All
That's,
right.
Because we were watching the video. That's funny. The video replay. Yeah, that's what I said. Because they laughed, but it was a delayed laugh because of the translation. And I'm like, ha, ha, ha. Oh, okay, good. Yeah, очень счастлив, я вас люблю. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I love you. So when we start talking about experiences that teach us the process of soliciting truth, the process of negotiation, the process of leadership, I really believe that the definition of sales, the definition of leadership, coaching, parenting is the transference of trust. I really believe that. But you can only trust truth. You can't seek counsel, not opinion. But a few years ago on October 23rd, I had the rare opportunity to soar to the edge of space in a U-2 reconnaissance aircraft. So I intensified my training. I lost 29 pounds. I checked onto the base for a full day of systems orientation. I was fitted into my 130-pound spacesuit. You can see my little 15-minute documentary. It was kind of dumbed down because it was classified mission, but you can see it on YouTube. But I in my 130-pound spacesuit, and I boarded my aircraft with my commander, and we immediately and rapidly climbed to 17 miles above the Earth's surface, where for 5 hours I sat in the sounds of silence, looking at the breathtaking curvature of the Earth, gazing into the endless blackness of the universe, pondering eternity and my place in it. To put it into perspective, Sir Richard Branson and Bezos, they both went a lot higher than me, but from launch to landing, they were only airborne 11 minutes, and they only saw the curvature of the Earth for 1 minute.
Wow.
So they were like a rock.
Yeah.
I sat there for 5 hours, 45 minutes to get to altitude, and I'm fogging up, I'm tearing up as an eyewitness to the words of Einstein that the mind once stretched can never return to its original dimensions. And because we've already brought up spirituality, by the way, religion's for those who are afraid to go to hell. Spirituality is for those of us who have already been there. May I remind all of your viewers and listeners that as I sat there looking at the curvature of the Earth, I teared up, knowing why Einstein also wrote that the concept of a supreme being and a master organizer, although it is complex, we must embrace the mindset of a young child who walks into a large library and says, surely someone must have written all these books. That within minutes, I agreed that we are more than mere mortal beings living on a small planet for a short season. But to our conversation, that experience changed my life forever. And I'm waiting for Branson, I'm waiting for Captain Kirk, I'm waiting for Bezos to explain what they learned, not just that it changed my life forever, not enough. So I've kind of distilled what I learned, and how it changed me forever. And what it did is it changed my perspective, which controls everything that we believe and do. Let me give you 4 quick examples. Is your glass half empty or half full? Or is it refillable? It's perspective. If all of us are in your studio here are looking out the same window at the same lashing rainstorm, and someone complains what a horrible day, and someone else exclaims what a wonderful day, the weather did not change. We don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. Third example, are you tall or short, fast or slow, successful or unsuccessful? Says who compared to what? It's perspective. And the best example I can give, let's say this side of my hand is painted white and this side is painted blue. What color is my hand? White, blue. Who's right? You all are, depending on our perspective. So in order for us to communicate at the deepest levels of empathy and true understanding, we have to be willing to come around on the other side of the hand. We have to acknowledge the other person's perspective and acknowledge that, yes, it is white or blue, which turns every argument about who is right into agreeing on what is right so we can move forward together. Somebody needs to tell that analogy in the chambers of the House and the Senate.
Do you mind expanding on that for my listeners and maybe for me?
Okay.
So if I have a disagreement with the side, and I'll pick both. I have a disagreement with the far right. I have a disagreement with the far left.
Absolutely.
That doesn't mean I shouldn't listen to them.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean that I shouldn't be empathetic about them. How do I do that? How do you see that that's best done?
Well, that's such a great question, Paul. He who speaks first loses the negotiation. So what we have to do is give them the opportunity, the opposition, whoever is disagreeing with us, we have to give them the opportunity to explain their facts, share their opinion on why they believe those facts or why they follow those facts and why it matters. And then through the law of reciprocity, the laws of psychological reciprocity, it's created a moral obligation for them to now ask us our opinion. What do we present as our facts? But like I said before, I mean, it's just being facetious that my buddy in college, he read that drinking too much alcohol is bad for you, so he stopped reading. Mm-hmm. People are saying, I don't believe that. Look at the vaccination facts that are now starting to come out after the vaccination. What a fiasco. What a joke. Mm-hmm. Are you freaking kidding me? Why can't we agree on certain aspects of what is obviously happening in our country? And when we want to heal America and everything's being politicized, at some point we just got to come right down to what's true. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about Israel and Palestine.
Before we do, I will end on, I'll give you kind of my input into that.
Yeah, please.
So oftentimes I find that it is hard for me to shut up first and listen because I have a strong opinion on something that I believe is true. And I think that that's partly caused because somehow or another I'm worried that I might compromise a value that's important to me. And I think what I've tried to learn as I've gotten older is, as you said, to listen and to recognize that I can change my opinion without changing my values. That I can say, maybe they're not coming from a bad place. Maybe they just have a different perspective of this and they're seeing it differently. But as you said, that doesn't mean you have to change your truth.
No.
All right, you can still put your truth out there. And oftentimes I find that if I base the truth in things that we all have in common, do we all agree that we're all created equal? Do we all agree that this is a right that we have that goes beyond some man gave it to me? That this is a right that goes beyond that? It begins to change the perspective of people so that you can pull them into at least some type of center ground. And not always, because sometimes they come with, their goal is they want to disrupt that system because they don't believe they can win in a democratic system that is based upon those fundamentals. But the point I guess I'm giving is you can be open to someone else's ideas. You can be empathetic without changing your truths.
Yeah. So it would begin with an agreement, and I guess the questions would be the trifecta platform to establish rules of engagement before we start to have this negotiation would be, do you agree that some things are true whether you believe them or not?
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Do you agree that everybody's entitled to their own opinion but nobody's entitled to the wrong facts? And do you agree that we shouldn't believe everything that we think? And based on those three questions and coming to an agreement, so those are the rules of engagement, what I would do is I would illustrate number 3 and say, okay, so on September 11th, we know what happened. But do you realize that in our country, and this is documented by the American School Counselors Association, that for 30 days after September 11th, our youngest, most impressionable children, ages 12 and under, 6th grade and under, were caught in this constant state of fear and trepidation. Loud noises startled them. They were scared to death. And so the American School Counselors Association decided it was their responsibility to get to the bottom of that. And they issued a 1-question survey to these young children in all 50 states. What happened on September 11th? And to the T, every response came back: bad men stole jets, crashed them into buildings, killing thousands of people, and they kept doing it. So what we as adults, as parents, as educators failed to realize, that after September 11th, on that beautiful Tuesday morning, every single retail store, every single school library, every single home had their television sets on 24/7. And these young, most impressionable children could not differentiate between real-time TV and video replay.
And
so bless
ergo,
their
they kept
hearts.
doing it.
So bless their hearts. They believed that we had been attacked 10 to 30 times every day for 30 days in a row. And it's tough enough for us to deal with reality, let alone misconceptions. No wonder they're scared to death. They didn't even want to go outside their homes. They wanted to be safe. They didn't want to go to school. And if they were in school, they didn't want to leave and go outside. We should not believe everything that we think. So at some point, I say pause. So I've done so much stuff with the military where there are 5 issues in all services are sexual assault, high propensity for suicide, high divorce rate, strength and diversity, and team unity. Those 5 issues. So that's why I've been downrange so many times, because the commanders and 4-star generals want to take the message to them while they're deployed, and so that we can really touch and connect before they come back and are inundated with fake news and a lack of understanding their spouse or significant other, and trying to figure out how to dance again when they've been gone for 179 days to 9 or 12 months. And so when we start talking about those issues, sexual assault, you know, I give this little pretest. I sit down with all of the soldiers, Marines, airmen, and sailors. And I said, let's just back up. Let's reverse engineer. You are the way you are because you were made, not because you were born. So the analogy is that you and I, Paul, go into the same car dealership and we buy the same car, get all the exact same accessories, the bells and whistles, we trick it out the same, and we pay the exact same money to the dime, to the penny for those cars. 3 years later, we take them back to the dealership, and yours is worth so much more than mine. Why? It was how you treated it. It was his environment. So if you go to a hospital here in Phoenix, if we go to a hospital and you look through no more of the birthing wards or birthing centers or whatever, let's just talk old school. You go into the 3rd floor and there's the nursery, and we're all standing in the hallway trying to find our newest grandbaby. And there's 20 babies there. They're all crying for the same reason. They laugh for the same reason. They crave human touch. They want to be held. We know that's human, that human need. And let's say that little blonde, blue-eyed grandbaby of yours, or let's just talk about mine, my little blue-eyed, blonde grandbaby Cora, that she, after birth, she's immediately whisked to China. She's adopted and she's raised in China, and she grows up speaking Chinese and believing in the Communist Party. Or you take that same little blonde, blue-eyed baby and immediately whisk her to the darkest places of Africa, where she's raised in a polygamous family, has no money, no educational opportunities, and grows up speaking Swahili and has no political background. Or you take that same little girl and you raise her in Phoenix, Arizona, in a two-parent family, and she grows up with educational opportunities, opportunities to dance, opportunities to sing, opportunities to do gymnastics. Remember, racism, we need accessibility. Not everybody's born equal if they don't have accessibility. So we need accessibility, accessibility, accessibility. That's how we solve it. But here's my point. You take that exact same little baby in the nursery and you raise Cora in Phoenix, Arizona, and she grows up speaking English and cheering on the Diamondbacks. Based on our environment, based on our input, based on how we were raised. So now if you go full circle, let's evaluate the systemic racism versus the systemic breakdown of the family. No role models, no core values, no this. I'm telling you what you said is everybody in America has the opportunity to get the education that they want. But if they don't have the access to the education that they need, they're never going to break out of their poverty. They're never going to break out of their situation. So what we have to do is make sure everybody has accessibility. That's how we stop racism. Accessibility, opportunities.
It's also how you deal with the economic divide that we talked about.
Exactly.
Regardless of what your race is, if we really believe economic disparity is an issue that has to be worked on,
it does.
It's very clear that people who don't graduate with a high school diploma and those people who go on to college, there is a massive divide between those two populations, not just in money, but in their health, in their longevity.
So you scratch where it itches. If your nose itches, you don't scratch your elbow. You know, I blew out my knee, and we've been raised, be a big boy, don't cry, and I'm a stud football player. I don't need any help. And my knee got so bad, I had this huge limp, which now caused back pain. When I finally broke down, I went to a back doctor, and he couldn't fix it because it wasn't a back injury. It was a knee injury. And once he recommended me, I went and had my knee operated on. Once I went to the real source of the pain, my back pain went away and my health came back. Mm-hmm. It's so obvious that what we have to do is evaluate each family, each person individually, like you said, what needs, what are they lacking in accessibility and opportunity? It's not a racist world. Don't blame me for being born white. Mm-hmm. But let's just deal with each individual. And if they are willing to go get education, then they have a right to complain. If they're not willing to go get an education and fix what's broken, if they're not willing to climb that economic income opportunity ladder to make themselves more valuable in the marketplace, then don't whine, don't piss and moan. You haven't bought into the core values that made America great, that were the ideals on which America was founded. So stop complaining. Mm-hmm. And just for the record, if you're making $5 an hour working at McDonald's, you're still a valued human being. You're valued by your family. You're valued by your siblings. You're valued, obviously, by God. Everybody's equal in the sight of God. But we're talking about value to the marketplace, so separate the person for the performance. And don't demand that we give you this $15 minimum wage when you have an opportunity to make yourself more valuable, to double your income, to triple your income, to quadruple your income. Anybody listening to this podcast needs to answer, do you have that opportunity in America to make as much money as you want? Yes. As you're an entrepreneur, there's no such thing as a financial crisis, only an idea crisis. Ideas create income. Mm-hmm. Let's figure out a way to come up with $1 million idea, put in the sacrifice, the work ethic, make sure you're trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Yeah, I was a Boy Scout. So that people want to do business with you. Mm-hmm. You know, like we said earlier, you know, the goal is to have everybody leave saying, I like me best when I'm with you. I want to see you again. And we must be that extraordinary human being. We must be willing to pay any price and travel any distance to associate with extraordinary human beings. In order for us to attract an extraordinary human being, don't you think we need to first be an extraordinary human being? Law of attraction, we don't attract who we want, we attract who we are. Fix yourself first, and all of a sudden you'll attract those who can help you make your dreams come true.
I like what you said in the very beginning, and I definitely believe that we should all seek to be a better version of ourselves, all of us. And that doesn't mean that either A, I'm going to do as well as Elon Musk, nor does it even mean that I want to do the same as Elon Musk, right? But I should seek to be a better version of myself. And I think the point that you made to me that you made in this conversation that I thought was very strong was there's this part of our consciousness. Morality is such a mystery.
Yeah.
Like, where did this come from? How do we end up having all these common moralities, regardless of what religion you're in, regardless of where you are in the world? That doesn't mean they're all the same, but there are some core basics that you can see that transfer from place to place. Following that, recognizing that you owe an obligation back, that being a better version of yourself also means that you have to care about other people. So that brings me back to Israel. I want to hear your ideas on what's going on with Israel and with Hamas today.
Well, this is what I had. I had an experience. Let me give you a preamble. So back in the 80s, I was in the Reagan White House, who took Mrs. Reagan's Just Say No program to all 50 states. And during that same time frame, I was at the tip of the spear of the suicide pandemic among teenagers, so I was at the prevention side of it. And because of what I've done, I've spoken 6,000 speeches, 75 countries, millions of people, most of the Fortune 500, about all those teenagers in college campuses, 100 college university campuses every year for all those years. I was invited to be the keynote speaker at an organization called Presidential Classroom, Washington, D.C. So those of us who are Americans, who are aware of the programs available for young people, American Legion sponsored Boys State and Girls State. And so they would identify an outstanding young man and an outstanding young woman from every state, and they would take them for this extraordinary experience. It was unbelievable. Well, I was not one of those Boys State, Girls State guys in high school. But as a keynote speaker, I was invited into Washington, D.C. for Presidential Classroom. So this was even a hybrid experience for a top young man and top young woman from each of the 50 states and from the District of Columbia. So there was 51 couples, if you will. So there's 102 young men and young women. And they came to Washington, D.C. for a 7-day, all expenses paid experience, 5 days of curriculum, and they'd go out. We would go and visit the museums and have the Smithsonian experience and all the monuments and everything. Unbelievable. And I spoke. And I gave my keynote speech. It was 60 minutes long, and it went well. And then immediately after me, they brought in 2 lobbyists. And they introduced the first lobbyist, and she was a woman. She was smart, sophisticated, elegant, polished, professional, borderline sassy with her confidence, just amazing. And she identified herself as a Republican, a conservative lobbyist. And I was a registered Republican. And when she got through with her 60-minute presentation, she got a standing ovation, especially from me. And I'm like, I agree with every single word you said. Anybody who disagrees is a complete idiot. Then we took a 15-minute break. And then an equally smart, talented, amazing, educated, sassy, just a phenomenal human being who happened to be a woman. She comes as a lobbyist from the left side of the aisle, from the Democrat, and she self-identifies, yes, I'm a Democrat and I work with the liberal caucus. And in the next 60 minutes, she gave the most phenomenal, most unbelievable presentation on the same issue that the previous lobbyist had delivered. And she got a long-standing ovation, especially from me. I agreed with every single thing she said, Paul. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it was right then and there that I realized long ago that you eliminate the far-left communists and the far-right fascists, and you start understanding what it really means to be an American. Living in America does not make you an American, that we understand the Constitution. We understand that the highest law of the universe is obedience, humility to submit to a higher authority, not man, but inalienable rights guaranteed by the heavens. We are not that far apart. Democrats and Republicans are not that far apart. I ski raced for 3.5 years. My dad was a Republican. He was a legislator. Big-time guy. That's how I was raised, with conservative values. And he was the first one, as soon as I got to voting age, he said, Dan, do not vote party. Always vote policy. Always vote the best person. Mm-hmm. And in Utah, predominantly a Republican state, we've always had the most phenomenal governors for many, many years who were Democrats. And my dad, my ski coach, was good old Ted Wilson, a Democrat. He ran for mayor. He was elected because of one of my votes. I voted for the best person in the election, and I challenge every American to do that, especially our House of Representatives right now who are in impasse because of politics, you flipping idiots.
I can't imagine this country without Hamilton or Jefferson.
Oh,
they were both necessary.
absolutely.
I really believe this. In both sides, if they turn to their extremes, it's rough to deal with them. But both of them have something to offer. Both of them have benefits. I want an educational system that works well. I want the poor to be able to have the same opportunities that everyone else has. I want civil rights and equal rights. But I also want the ability to own a business and to be able to own what I create. And the human spirit should matter in this process, not just the human being. Both sides bring something to the table, and losing either one of them is not good for us. We just need to be able to draw from both of them. But that takes listening.
I agree. And let me just share my own little personal story. I played football for 13 years, and one day in practice, the dream ended. Coach blew the whistle, and another player and I ran full speed into each other in a violent head-on collision, smashing my right shoulder into the cutting edge of my fiberglass pads, and we slammed to the ground. And when Lyle got off of me, I had compressed my 7 cervical vertebrae. I had severed the axillary nerve in my right deltoid, and I suffered a grade level 2 concussion. My eye drooped. I had lost the speech, couldn't talk anymore. Right side was paralyzed, arm dangled at my side, leaving me paralyzed for 14 months. Went to 16 doctors, 15 of whom told me I would not recover. I would never get any better. How many of you have ever heard that? What happens if we believe it? We never get any better. And my life spiraled downward until I hit what I thought was rock bottom. Now my point to our whole conversation, now that I've fought my way back to a 95% recovery, the 3 most frequently asked questions are these. Clark, what do you mean you said you thought you hit rock bottom? No matter how bad it gets, Paul, no matter how hard things get, no one ever hits rock bottom. We hit rock foundation. We hit rock belief. We hit the baseline core values and American ideals on which we were raised. And in an economic crunch, if our businesses seem to have hit a bump in the road, they didn't hit rock bottom. They hit the baseline governing principles on which they were built. So right now, the statistics in America are family-owned businesses become bankrupt. They go bankrupt by the 3rd generation. 85% of family-owned businesses go bankrupt by the 3rd generation. Why? It's because this new generation who thinks of entitlement instead of opportunity, they fail to subscribe to the same core values and ideals, character traits, attributes, qualities that their grandpa and grandma used to build the business, to grow the business, and they just thought the business would grow itself. They didn't take advantage of the opportunities in America. So we have to understand the significance of never saying I hit rock bottom, we hit rock foundation, we hit rock belief. What do you believe? Second most frequently asked question, why did I keep going to so many different doctors? Ties right into our conversation where we began. I kept going from doctor to doctor until I found one who believed I would get better, who taught me and reminded me that knowledge is power, but knowledge has no heart. We don't learn to know, we learn to do. All the information in the world isn't going to make a person successful. It's like the guy who has 3 PhDs, one in philosophy, one in psychology, one in sociology. He doesn't have a job, but at least he can explain why. So reason leads to conclusions, but it is emotion that leads to action. Reason leads to conclusions, but it is emotion that leads to action. And the third most frequently asked question ties it all together. What took me so long to recover? What takes people longer to recover or pivot out of COVID than others? What's taken our government so long? What's taken our House of Representatives so long to vote in a new speaker? And hopefully we have one by the time this airs. Well, the answer is I stayed paralyzed for 14 months because I was asking the wrong questions. I was asking the doctors how to get better when I should have been asking myself why. And once we answer why, figuring out the how-to becomes clear and simple. And so you don't think my recovery was a rah-rah, you can if you think you can. No, it's based in physiology. It's based in science. Because when we only focus on the what and the how, we only engage the brain. But when we add to that a passionate why, and a compelling want, which is the meaningful reason, the meaningful goal, It connects our head with our heart. And physiologically proven, our blood pumps more rapidly, our brains fire, and our muscles magnify, which maximizes our performance.
First question I ask when I mentor someone who is in business, which is, what is your why?
You got
and
it.
if I don't get a good why, I'm pretty good at determining whether they're going to make it. Because there's so many hardships in business. It's hard for people to recognize how many difficult things that entrepreneurs go through. If you have a why, you can weather those storms.
Yep.
If you don't have a why, it becomes very difficult to do.
And if you have the same why, if you share the same why with teammates, with family members, with your business associates, the same why are you an American? Why are you, we can accomplish anything. It just triggered in my mind. I was invited to the state capitol to watch, I think there were 50 individuals that day who raised their arm to the square and were sworn in as official citizens of the United States of America. And I'd never heard the ceremony. I'd never heard the words. And I looked it up on my phone and I read it again and again. They have to denounce their former country and pledge to defend our Constitution and take up arms if necessary to defend our freedom and what America is about. And you get these wingtips waving their flags from the country they came from who are not Americans protesting something that we have committed to do, and that's protect and defend Israel. So that takes us back into what we were talking about. So is my hand white or is my hand blue? The Republican and Democrat who presented these magnificent arguments as lobbyists. Let's come to grips with not who's right, but what's right. So food for thought. I've never been to Israel. I've never been to the Gaza Strip. I've never been to Palestine. I understand terrorism. I've looked evil in the eye. I've seen the bad guys. And some people in this world just want to deny that there's evil. They deny it. So on defense of both sides of the Israel-Hamas situation, if you my buddy went to Gaza, and actually, let me share this story. So I've served on the International Board of Governors of Operation Smile. We do the cleft lip, cleft palate surgeries all over the world. International spokesperson, Roma Downey, touched by an angel, one of the classiest, spiritual, amazing human beings who ever lived. I love this woman, and I honor her family. Had some pretty heavy hitters on our board. And one of the great things that happened is Dr. Bill McGee and his wife Kathy, who started Operation Smile, they have a photograph of them in a Jewish hospital with a Palestinian doctor operating on a young Arab child, a young Christian child, and you have Arafat's wife holding the Jewish baby. So when you start talking about humanitarian, when you start talking about service before self, when you start talking about what I saw from space, that the same God who made you made me too, that all of those borders are man-made, that from space it's one earth. We literally are brothers and sisters in the family of humanity. Who are we fooling to kill each other in the name of the same God? Are you kidding me? But when my buddy went across the border into Gaza, when he left, he said he became a fan of the Palestinians. And when you go across the border and you spend time in Israel, you become a fan of the Jews, fan of Israel. That experience reminds me of when I first went to Russia in 1991. You and I are both old enough to remember the civil defense drills. You know, in case the Russians attack, we got to climb under our desks. We got to go to the bomb shelter in the bottom of our elementary schools. We were afraid of the Russians. They're the bad. And the Cold War. And I get over there, Paul. They have the steepest, fastest moving escalators I've ever seen in the world, because you take the escalator down to the subway, and that's where their bomb shelters were.
By the way, beautiful subway station.
Oh, I know.
It was unbelievable.
But they were just as afraid of us as we were of them. Mm-hmm. And you get over there, when I started hosting and creating and producing these shows, most of the folks, because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, were military brass, healthcare professionals, and educators. And I was a guest at the Bolshoi Ballet, went backstage, met the prima ballerina, went to St. Petersburg. They took us on a private backstage tour of the Hermitage, one of the most famous and beautiful,
It is beautiful
museums on the planet. And you know what? I would go back to my hotel and I'd get a tear in my eye. They love their children. They love art. They cherish education. They want the best. And their corrupt politicians are screwing it up. 72 years of communism, unbeknownst to what was happening with that constant bombardment and input of this is what you want to believe. This is the propaganda. This is the programming, using your word from previous podcasts. We're hardwired to be programmed. Let's be careful of who's programming us. So when I'm talking to these military young guys, I'm like, okay, so we all came to Earth in the same way. You go to that nursery and the babies all cry and laugh for the same reasons. Who made you racist? I want to know the name and I want to know the time frame of when you decided that this race was inferior to your own. I want to know. And let's itemize it right now. Was it Uncle Whistle Dick? Who was it? I want to know why you're a Republican or a Democrat. You weren't born that way. When did you get conservative views? When did you get liberal views? What and who? And could you learn and unlearn and relearn? Absolutely you can. So who taught you that it was okay to assault a woman? In what culture does it say it's okay for a man to strike a woman for any reason at all? I want to know who taught you that and how old were you and why did you buy into that? And now can you learn? Yeah. Can you unlearn it and relearn a higher law, a higher way? Can you get a higher class of loser friend like we talk about in country music? And once we put them through this test, who, when, where did you learn this? Now let's talk about it in real terms with your illuminated light, as you talk about, with the newest and highest, clearest truth. Should you be a racist? Should you engage in sexual assault or sexual harassment? No. Who are you fooling? So what we have to do is we have to get them to unwind that wire that's been wound all these years by corrupt individuals in their lives that taught them that this was the truth. Yeah, it inherently, I think anyone from any country and race and socioeconomic condition knows inherently that you don't knock somebody out of a wheelchair. I think that every person truly was born with the conscience that there really is absolute truth, and we just have to figure out what we agree on and what it is.
Yeah, I think evil is interesting because first, I think it exists in all of us. I also think all of us have the potential to do good. It's in every human being. Solzhenitsyn said that what ideology does is it releases your responsibility for that evil. All of a sudden you can say, well, they're evil, we're good, so now it's okay that we do whatever it is that we want to them. You can objectify them. And what happens is the more intense the ideology, the more intense the evil, the more intense that the evil inside of those human beings end up being released.
Which is Hamas, the terrorist organization, and their entire mission is to annihilate Israel from the face of the earth. So when I said Palestine and I said Gaza, I didn't say Hamas.
Absolutely.
They need to be defeated. They need to be taken off the earth just like ISIS.
Yeah, and it's I think the thing that's powerful about that is they start with a negative statement. They start with an ideological statement that's about destroying another group of people, as opposed to here's what we'd like to build. I think one of the challenges for Americans, I have been to Gaza, but long before their borders were closed up. We think that everyone in the world wants the same thing that we want. We think that they want prosperity, they want a job, they want economic opportunity. I think in general, most people do want those things. But every group that gets control, that's not necessarily their driver. Now, I think in Hamas's case, their view of salvation is the priority. It's a much bigger priority than economic prosperity. But they
honor death, and while we honor life, they honor death.
Mm-hmm. And they're driven by revenge.
You got it.
By anger. If you ask me in our country, the thing that we should really be careful about is putting ourselves in check. Are we being driven by anger by what we see happening with other people in other parties? Or are we just simply trying to make certain that we're doing the right thing and trying to listen to people and to give them a fair shot without giving up those values. Those values are key. Okay, I have to ask one question real quick. Did you get to meet Reagan when you were in the White House?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, you got to give me one good Reagan story before we're done here.
Just his ability to use humor to diffuse any situation. And he was, it's become a popular statement these days, you got to be present in the moment. And he always was. He was aware of everything around him. I was in his presence a few times. And one of the classic lines that you just need to Google is when he's in a debate with Mondale. And Mondale wants to make a big deal that he's older than Mondale. And Reagan's comment, paraphrasing, was basically, I won't let your youth and inexperience get in the way.
Yeah.
I mean, what a classic line. J.F. Kennedy, he used humor. When he had all the big wigs at the White House, ambassadors, presidents of countries, and he said, we haven't had this much, this collection of this level of intellectual collection in the White House since Thomas Jefferson dined alone, these great lines.
Yeah. So
I think, he had an advantage over most, if not all, of those who've served in the White House based on his acting. He could read a teleprompter better than anyone. He had timing.
I only got to meet him once.
Oh.
And it was a dinner with he and Tip O'Neill had come to this event. And then do you remember Pierre Salinger that worked for Kennedy, the speechwriter? So, I asked them for advice. And what was funny was that Tip O'Neill and Reagan, they genuinely liked one another.
They were
great friends. It was a very positive
absolutely.
conversation and listening to them. Reagan was just so powerfully optimistic when I was talking to him. But the thing that got me was Pierre Salinger's comment. After they left, Pierre shook his head and he said, boy, Reagan and John F. Kennedy, they're so much alike. I was like, what? How are those two guys alike? He goes, oh, look. He said, they certainly have a different view of what they want to do. He said, but they both come from a very optimistic place. They believe in who we are and what it is that we can accomplish. And he said, you'll find in politics that not everyone does, that not everyone comes from that same place. That to me is a statement about what's happening in the world. And it's also the statement about why optimism. Optimism is about it's not that there aren't problems, and it's not that being optimistic doesn't mean you ignore those problems. But the people who are going to solve those problems are the people who believe that you can.
I totally agree. And you have to reverse engineer and figure out why are we inundated with people who think they can't. It's the way they were raised. And if they had learned it, they can unlearn it. They can relearn it. When you go downrange.
I like the way that you ask those questions, which is, when did you hear that?
And from who and why? Why?
Mm-hmm.
When you start understanding the significance of learning from our failures, learning from our accidents, in all due respect, I wouldn't have even met you, Paul, and had this wonderful experience becoming friends with you if I hadn't been paralyzed all those years ago, which makes my paralysis one of the best things that ever happened to me. Mm-hmm. So I find that pessimists are those who try to avoid risk. They avoid pressure. Pressure is not something that's naturally there. It's created when you question your own ability, when you know what you've been trained to do. There's never any pressure. That's why we train and practice so hard, like we talked about.
All right, last question for you. And this is an important one.
Okay, I'm ready. The other ones weren't. Okay, rewind.
They were important.
Don't you like when you're talking to people? Can I now be honest?
Yeah. Well, the name of my podcast. So this is relating to that. Many people watch what's happening in America today. Our Congress who can't get a speaker. We have two people running for president that right now 70% of the public says they don't want either one. Yeah. We have these divisions amongst Democrats and Republicans that are going on. Is your view we're going to be okay? Or is your view we have some big problems that we're going to have to overcome, or some mixture of the two?
Okay, so let's just figure out what we believe. Like I said, if you want to find out about Jesus stumbling towards the cross, you don't ask Judas Iscariot. You ask Peter, James, or John, or his mother Mary. Check your source of truth. Right now, mainstream media is showing the thousands of protesters with Palestinian flags most of whom are not Americans. They haven't bought into our core values, so I don't really respect them at all. Somebody needs to go and arrest all of them and take them out, even though we have the right to peacefully assemble and demonstrate. We know that. Mm-hmm. Black Lives Matter, that wasn't peaceful demonstration. Are you kidding me? Come on. I love the song Not in My Town, Not in a Small Town, Jason Aldean, and that was not racist and that's not controversial. That's truth. Don't come messing with my things that I own. If I need to get to the airport and I'm in a car and I've made a commitment and they're paying me big bucks to go speak to a convention and I have to catch that flight and I've got protesters in the middle of the street, whose rights are being violated, theirs or mine? I still have the right to catch my flight. I still have the right to keep my commitment to make a living without anybody interfering. If I'm in a restaurant and someone's smoking and blowing the smoke on me and I'm not, who has the rights, whose rights are being offended? Come on. You know, if somebody's smoking back in the day and they're blowing smoke on me, I'd just go get a banana, I'd eat it, and I'd throw the banana peel on them. I'm 6'5". They're like, what are you doing? I'm like, I got to go get my clothes clean too, dude. So we got to start thinking about rights with responsibility. So when we get mainstream media only showing the protesters, I'm glad you asked me that question, because back in the day with so much history, speaking to high school students and college campuses, between 1983 and 1989, I spoke in 3 high schools every day, 15 a week for 140 school days a year, and then 100 college university campuses every year for 7.5 years, 83 to 89, when working with the Reagan White House. So now that I'm old and I'm mostly in the corporate arena, I still keep my fingers in youth leadership. So Future Farmers of America, FFA, you get 3, 5, 7, 10,000 young men and young women, high school age, a little younger, maybe middle school, high school, college age. Future Business Leaders of America, DECA, Distributive Education Clubs of America. These are high school students. The Junior Achievement, Hugh O'Brien Foundation, Association of Student Councils, and my favorite, 4-H, and Boy Scouts of America. You have these youth leadership organizations. I think there's probably 20. There were 16 when I was doing all of them back in the day. Spoke 7 times at the National DECA Convention, 7 times at the National Future Business Leader of America, and then they had regionals, and then they all had state conventions. So I was always around our young people. So even though I haven't spoken for them in a huge way at the state or regional level, just the national conventions over the last few years, and I want to continuously do that. For 27 years in a row, this will be my 28th year in a row, over Thanksgiving, speaking in Atlanta, Georgia, to the National 4-H Congress. So they have anywhere from 2,000, sometimes 3,500 young men and young women from all over the states and Puerto Rico who come together for a 5-day conference, and the Hyatt Regency hosts them every year because they leave their hotel rooms in better shape than they found them. They don't trash them. They give them an award for the cleanest room at the end of the week. You hear no vulgarity on the elevators. You go to the dance, and the gentlemen actually walk across the dance floor and ask the gal to come and dance, or they dance in groups. They're not partying. There's no fights. It's just totally classy. They speak the Queen's English, which matters to me, because if you want to be an American, you better learn, our native tongue, if you will. And although those who are bilingual and trilingual are some of the smartest people on our planet, we need to acknowledge that. Anytime I hear someone with an accent, I want to know their story because they're smarter than me. They speak more than just 2 languages. They're brilliant, and I love that. And our country surely is a potpourri of a mixture of races. But what we've been talking about this whole podcast is agreeing on cultural core values, which bring us together.
Common narratives.
Common narrative. So what happens is, to answer your question, good brother, is when I stand up and I speak for 60 to 90 minutes to these young people, and I have for 27 years in a row, America's in really good shape. We have smart, talented, educated, passionate, trustworthy, classy, character-based, core value-driven young men and young women in our country. And they will become the leaders in our communities lead with and without a title.
Hey, thank you very much.
Thanks
for
Paul.
coming.
You are one good man.
We appreciate it.
Thank you for your platform.
Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Now, help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned. We can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.